The room was quiet except for the soft sound of people waiting. It was an event where many young actors and filmmakers had gathered, hoping to learn from those who had already walked the long road of struggle. In that room, three people who never expected to share such a moment found themselves sitting only a few rows apart. Keanu Reeves, known for his calm nature, sat quietly with his hands resting on his lap. Ana de Armas entered with her natural warmth, smiling softly at those who greeted her. And then, Sweeney, still newer to the industry compared to the other two, came in with a nervous expression, as though unsure if she even belonged among so many shining faces. The host began speaking about humility, kindness, and respect, saying these qualities mattered just as much as talent in the world of art. But while the words floated through the air, Sydney shifted in her seat. She had faced judgment before. Many people had told her she was too young or too inexperienced or too emotional. The doubts weighed heavily on her shoulders, and she could feel the same questions running through her mind again. Did she deserve to be there? Did anyone really respect her voice? As the conversation opened, a speaker made a comment about how only those with long experience could truly inspire. Sydney lowered her gaze. Those words cut her like sharp glass. She thought of all the long nights she had spent working, rehearsing, and dreaming, only to feel dismissed in an instant. Her heart raced. She wanted to disappear. Keanu noticed. He did not speak right away. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, as though he was simply listening more closely. His eyes, however, rested on Sydney with quiet care. He had once known that same feeling of not being enough, of being overlooked when all he wanted was to try his best. He remembered his own struggles, the losses, and the countless times he felt invisible. Without interrupting, he waited for the right moment. When the speaker finished, Keanu raised his hand. The room grew silent, curious to hear what he might say. His voice was gentle, almost steady, like a calm wave. "Respect does not depend on how many years you have," he said slowly. "Respect belongs to anyone who gives their heart to what they do. I have seen young people carry wisdom deeper than their age. I have seen beginners teach lessons that even the most experienced sometimes forget." He turned his gaze toward Sydney, though he did not point her out. Instead, he spoke in a way that lifted her without exposing her. "When we show respect to one another, no matter where we come from or how far we have walked, we remind ourselves of what really matters. We remind ourselves of kindness." The words hung in the air. There was no sound, only a stillness that touched everyone present. And then quietly but clearly, Ana de Armas smiled. She had seen Keanu's respect, his choice to honor someone else without making it about himself. The smile she gave was not just for him, but for the truth he had shared. Sydney's eyes lifted. For the first time that evening, she felt the heavy weight inside her chest ease just a little. It was as if someone had finally reminded her that she mattered too. That single moment became the spark of something larger. It was not planned, and it was not grand in appearance, but it carried the power of sincerity. Respect, humility, resilience, and kindness, all the things people talked about in speeches, were now alive in one act. And though the night still had many hours to go, everyone knew the memory of those words would remain long after they left the hall. After the event ended, people began to move toward the doors, their conversations buzzing with the kind of energy that follows something unexpected. Some were whispering about Keanu's words, others about the way Ana had smiled, and a few looked quietly at Sydney, as if seeing her in a new light. Sydney felt the weight of eyes on her, but this time it did not sting. Instead, there was a strange comfort in it, as though people had noticed her without judgment. She gathered her bag slowly, trying to steady her breathing. Deep inside, she still felt unsure, but there was also a spark of courage she had not carried before. Keanu stayed behind, letting the crowd pass first. He had never been the type to rush toward attention. He preferred silence, the space between the noise where truth could be felt more clearly. He noticed Sydney lingering near the exit, hesitating as if deciding whether to leave or stay. Anna, too, seemed unhurried, taking her time as she thanked a few of the younger artists who came to her with questions. There was something soft in her way of speaking, a warmth that made even strangers feel like they belonged. It was then that their paths naturally crossed, not because anyone forced it, but because life sometimes chooses quiet moments to bring people together. Sydney's voice trembled slightly when she finally spoke, her eyes shifting between Keanu and Anna. "Thank you," she said. Her words were simple, almost too small for the weight she felt inside. But Keanu understood. He gave a small nod, the kind of gesture that meant more than many speeches. "You don't need to thank me," he replied gently. "You already carried the strength. Sometimes you just need someone to remind you it is there." Those words pressed deep into Sydney's heart. She had heard encouragement before, but something about Keanu's calm truth felt different. It was not a compliment given out of kindness alone, it was respect given with honesty. Anna stepped closer, her smile still present, but now touched with thoughtfulness. "You know," she said softly, "every person who begins in this path feels invisible at some point. I remember sitting in rooms where nobody believed I belonged. I remember wishing someone would just see me. But in time I learned that the right people will see you. And when they do, it changes everything." Her voice carried a quiet fire, a mix of memory and hope. Sydney looked at her with wide eyes, surprised that even someone as graceful as Anna had once felt the same fears. The three of them walked together toward the outside doors. The night air met them with a cool breeze, carrying away some of the heaviness that had filled the hall. The street was alive with traffic and voices, but around them there was a circle of stillness. Keanu stopped and looked at the two women, his eyes steady, almost reflective. "Respect is not a gift we give only to the famous or the experienced," he said. "It is something we give to remind ourselves that everyone is human, everyone is worthy. When we forget that, we lose a piece of our own humanity." Sydney felt her throat tighten. She wanted to cry, but not from sadness, more from the release of years of self-doubt that suddenly felt lighter. Anna reached out gently, touching Sydney's arm in support. "He is right," she whispered, "and you are stronger than you think." In that moment, Sydney's chest filled with a strange mixture of relief and determination. She realized that maybe her journey was not about proving herself to everyone, but about believing in herself and respecting others along the way. None of them knew it then, but this small exchange outside the hall would echo far beyond that night. It would become the seed of a bond built not on fame or success, but on something deeper: humility, resilience, and kindness. What started as a simple gesture of respect had already begun to change the way they saw each other, and even the way they saw themselves. The next morning, Sydney woke up earlier than usual. The memory of the night before still rested in her heart, almost like a quiet light that would not fade. She sat by the window with a cup of tea, looking out at the city. Cars moved, people hurried, but for her, the world felt a little different. She replayed Keanu's words again and again. Every time she remembered his calm voice saying, "Respect belongs to anyone who gives their heart to what they do." Her doubts softened. Still, there was fear, too. She wondered if she could carry that strength into the next day, or if it would slip away when she faced judgment again. While Sydney fought her inner questions, Keanu spent his morning walking through a quiet park. He often found peace in nature, away from the noise of fame. Yet his mind also returned to the night before. He thought of Sydney's eyes, the way they carried both hope and pain. He knew that journey well. He too had lived through endless moments where people only saw his silence, never realizing how much he carried inside. He had chosen respect, not just to lift her, but because he believed it was the only way forward in life. He remembered the struggles of his past, the personal losses, the loneliness. Those experiences had taught him that the smallest act of kindness could save a person without anyone even noticing. Anna, on the other hand, was in a studio that morning preparing for a new role. The makeup artist chatted, the team worked around her, but her thoughts lingered on Sydney as well. Anna had smiled last night not because the moment was light, but because she recognized something rare in Keanu's gesture. He had not spoken to impress. He had spoken to heal, and Anna knew the industry desperately needed more of that. She herself had walked into rooms where people doubted her, judged her accent, or dismissed her talent. The memory of that pain gave her empathy, and she silently promised herself she would look out for Sydney whenever she could. As the day passed, fate drew the three of them together again. A charity event had been arranged to support young artists, and all three had agreed to attend without realizing they would see each other there. The hall was filled with people, lights flashing, cameras clicking, but beneath the glamour, there was real need. Many young men and women stood in the corners, holding their work portfolios, too nervous to step forward, too afraid of being ignored. Sydney noticed them. In their faces, she saw herself, just as she had been the night before, uncertain, invisible, lost in doubt. This time, instead of shrinking back, she remembered Keanu's words. She walked slowly toward one of the nervous young artists, a girl holding a sketchbook close to her chest as though it were her shield.
"Can I see?"
Sydney asked gently. The girl looked shocked at first, then nodded, opening the pages with trembling hands. Inside were drawings filled with raw talent, but also the marks of someone who still doubted her own worth. Sydney smiled softly.
"These are beautiful,"
she whispered.
"Don't let anyone tell you otherwise."
The girl's eyes widened with disbelief, as if those words had given her permission to breathe again. From across the room, Keanu and Anna both saw what had happened. Keanu's heart lifted. He understood immediately. Sydney was no longer only carrying her own pain, she was already giving strength to others. Anna's smile returned too, bright, but also touched with pride. She walked over and stood beside Sydney, adding her own voice.
"Your art deserves to be seen," she told the young girl. "Believe in it."
Together, they made the moment real. Respect, kindness, and resilience were no longer just words spoken in a hall. They were alive in their actions. As the evening continued, more people gathered around them. Some were drawn by curiosity, others by the quiet energy that surrounded the three. Without planning it, they had created a space where people felt safe to share. Sydney realized something powerful. Respect was not only something you received, it was something you gave, and in giving it, you found your own strength grow. The days after the charity event felt like a quiet turning point. Sydney noticed herself standing a little taller when she entered a room. The fear had not completely left her, but it no longer controlled her. She carried with her the echo of Keanu's voice and the warmth of Anna's support. Yet with every step forward comes a test, and that test arrived sooner than anyone expected. A week later, Sydney was invited to an important roundtable discussion with well-known directors and producers. It was supposed to be a chance for young actors to share their views, but the moment she walked in, she felt the old pressure return. The room was full of experienced voices, and the conversation quickly became dominated by those who believed youth meant inexperience. When it was finally Sydney's turn to speak, one of the older producers leaned back in his chair and said with a half-smile, "Perhaps you should just listen today. This might be too heavy for someone at your stage." The words stung like a slap. Her hands trembled under the table. The doubt she thought she had buried began to rise again. What she did not know was that Keanu had been asked to attend the same event as a guest mentor. He had been sitting quietly in the back, listening. As soon as he heard the dismissive comment, He leaned forward, his calm but steady voice filling the room. "With respect," he said, "I think we are here to listen to every voice. Wisdom does not only belong to age. Sometimes the most important truth comes from the ones who are not afraid to speak it for the first time." His words were not loud, but they carried weight. The room shifted. Silence spread for a moment, and all eyes turned to Sydney. Sydney's heart pounded. She felt the fear fighting her, but she also felt the memory of Keanu's earlier words, the memory of Anna's smile, and the image of that young artist clutching her sketchbook. She realized she was not only speaking for herself now, she was speaking for all who had been silenced before. Taking a slow breath, she lifted her voice. "Stories reach people because they are honest," she said softly, "not because they are told by someone older or younger. Honesty does not have an age." Her voice shook at first, but with each word it grew stronger. By the time she finished, the room was quiet in a different way, no longer dismissive, but listening. Anna, who had also joined the event, could not hide her pride. She gave Sydney a nod that was small but powerful, the kind of gesture that told her she had done more than just survive the moment. She had owned it. One of the younger directors spoke up after her, agreeing with her words, and soon the conversation began to shift toward a more open tone. What had started as an attempt to silence her had turned into a chance to open the room for others. After the session ended, Sydney stepped outside, her body trembling with the release of so much tension. She leaned against the wall, taking slow breaths. Keanu walked out soon after, standing a few feet away without saying anything at first. His silence was not heavy. It was the kind that gave her space to breathe. Finally, he spoke, his words gentle. "You see? It was always inside you. Respect is strongest when it comes from within." Sydney's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that she had begun to believe in herself. Anna soon joined them, slipping her arm around Sydney's shoulders like an older sister would. "You turned their words into your strength," she whispered. "That is something no one can take away from you." The three of them stood together under the fading light of the evening, unaware that their bond was becoming more than friendship. It was becoming a force, one that others would notice, and one that would soon be challenged by struggles even larger than these rooms of judgment. The storm came sooner than anyone thought. One evening, a headline spread across the media like fire. It was not about a film release or a performance. It was about a supposed conflict. Someone had twisted Sydney's words from the round table discussion and printed them in a way that made it look as if she had insulted senior actors. The article was harsh, and the comments beneath it were cruel. Strangers on the internet called her disrespectful, ungrateful, and even arrogant. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Sydney sat in her apartment, her phone buzzing nonstop, her heart sinking deeper with every message. She whispered to herself, "I never said it like that. Why are they doing this?" But the world outside did not hear her truth. Anna was the first to call. Her voice was calm, but her concern was clear. "Don't read the comments," she said firmly. "They do not know you. They do not know your heart." But Sydney's voice broke as she replied, "What if they are right? What if people now believe I am the opposite of who I want to be?" Tears blurred her eyes. It felt as if all the strength she had built in the last few weeks was collapsing under the weight of lies. Keanu came to her apartment that same night. He did not arrive with loud promises or quick solutions. Instead, he knocked softly, and when she opened the door, he simply stepped inside and sat with her in silence. His presence alone was steady, like a rock against the storm. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "The world will always have voices that twist kindness into weakness or honesty into arrogance. But respect is not something they give you or take away. It is something you live, even when no one is watching." Sydney listened, her tears slowing as his words sank in. He was right. The truth of her heart had not changed, no matter what the headlines said. The next day, Anna invited both of them to a small cafe away from the noise of cameras. She had already spoken with a journalist she trusted, someone who believed in fairness. "We will not fight with anger," Anna said as she stirred her coffee slowly. "We will show respect even to those who disrespected us. That will speak louder than anything they write." Sydney looked doubtful. "But what if no one listens?" she asked softly. Anna leaned closer and replied, "They will listen if you speak with honesty. People can feel the truth when it comes from the heart." A week later, the three of them appeared together at a public event. Many expected tension, but what they saw was unity. When the questions about the article came, Sydney took a deep breath and answered without bitterness. "I never meant to disrespect anyone," she said gently. "I spoke about honesty in stories because I believe every voice matters. I respect those who came before me, and I also respect those who are still waiting to be heard. Respect is not about competition, it is about connection." The room fell silent. For a moment, even the reporters who had doubted her felt the weight of her sincerity. Keanu added softly, "True respect is shown not in words alone, but in how we treat each other when misunderstandings come. Sydney has carried herself with humility through this, and that deserves recognition." Anna placed her hand on Sydney's shoulder, smiling warmly. "Sometimes storms try to break us," she said, "but if we stand together, they only make us stronger." The headlines that followed were different this time. People began to talk not about conflict, but about resilience, about how Sydney had faced the storm without anger, and how Keanu and Anna had stood beside her. What had begun as an attempt to destroy her image had instead revealed her strength. Yet even as the storm calmed, none of them knew that a deeper trial still waited ahead, one that would test not just their respect for each other, but their very capacity to hold on to kindness in the face of real loss. The calm after the storm did not last long. Just when it seemed Sydney was beginning to breathe again, another challenge appeared. This time, it was not about rumors or twisted headlines. It was something far more personal. One evening, as she prepared for an audition, she received a call that shook her to her core. Her childhood home had caught fire. Though her family managed to escape, many of their belongings, memories, and safety were gone. Her voice trembled as she told Anna and Keanu, "They have nothing left. Everything is burned. I don't know what to do." Tears streamed down her face as her hands shook, the weight of helplessness pressing against her chest. Keanu was silent for a long moment. He knew the pain of loss deeply, and he understood there were no words that could erase what had happened. Still, he spoke with quiet strength. "You don't need to do this alone," he said. "We will stand with you." His tone was steady, not as comfort alone, but as a promise. Anna reached for Sydney's hand across the table. "You have given kindness to others," she whispered. "Now let us give it to you." For the first time since the call, Sydney felt a small light of hope, fragile, but real, that maybe she did not have to carry everything on her own. The three of them traveled to Sydney's hometown a few days later. The scene of the fire was devastating. The charred remains of walls, the smell of smoke still hanging heavy in the air. Sydney's parents stood near the ruins, trying to stay strong though their faces were worn with exhaustion. Sydney embraced them, tears spilling freely, her voice breaking as she said, "I'm so sorry, I should have been here." Her mother shook her head gently. "No, my child. You are here now. That is enough." Still, Sydney felt the guilt of distance, the weight of wondering if she could have done more. Keanu stood quietly beside her, his eyes scanning the destruction. He had seen enough of life to know how quickly everything could be taken away. But he also knew that resilience often rose from ashes. He placed a hand on Sydney's shoulder, grounding her. "Home is not only in the walls we build," he said softly. "Home is in the love that survives even when everything else is gone." His words sank deep into Sydney's heart, steadying her like an anchor in a raging sea. Anna, meanwhile, spoke gently with Sydney's parents, offering comfort and practical help. She organized donations, spoke to volunteers, and even arranged temporary housing. Her natural warmth turned strangers into allies, and soon neighbors came together, bringing food, clothes, and support. Sydney watched in quiet amazement as kindness rippled through the community. She realized that respect and compassion were not just words for stages and interviews. They were alive in the actions of people who chose to care even when they had nothing to gain. That night, the three of them sat outside near the remains of the house, the cool air carrying both sorrow and calm. The stars above shone with quiet indifference, yet to Sydney they felt like reminders of endurance. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice raw. "You have stood with me through everything. I don't deserve this." Keanu shook his head gently. "This is not about deserving. This is about being human." Anna smiled softly, her hand resting on Sydney's. "And you have always deserved kindness. Never doubt that." In that moment, Sydney realized something powerful. Respect was not only about standing tall in public rooms or facing cruel words. It was about standing together in moments of loss, when the world felt broken and fragile. Resilience was not about pretending to be strong, but about letting others help carry the weight when it became too heavy. Kindness was not weakness, it was survival. The weeks after the fire became a journey of rebuilding. Sydney stayed close to her family, often traveling back and forth between her work and her hometown. Keanu and Anna visited often, helping not only with practical needs but also with quiet encouragement that gave strength when the nights felt too long. Through the ashes of loss, new bonds grew stronger, woven by respect, resilience, and kindness. Yet as life began to move forward, another challenge rose, this time not in the form of rumor or disaster, but in the form of choice. One evening, Sydney received an offer from a major studio. It was the role of her dreams, the kind of opportunity that could lift her career to a new level. But there was a cost. The contract required her to begin filming immediately, which meant leaving her family before their new home was ready. She sat in silence, the papers spread across her table, her heart pulled in two directions. She whispered to herself, "How can I chase my dream when my family still stands among ruins?" The thought of abandoning them tore at her soul, yet the fear of losing her chance made her tremble. Anna was the first to speak when Sydney told her about the offer. "This is your moment," she said softly, "but only you can decide what respect means in this choice. Is it respect for your dream, or respect for your family's need? Neither path is wrong, but the weight is real." Her eyes carried the wisdom of someone who had faced the same kind of impossible decisions. Keanu, sitting quietly, finally added, "Sometimes respect is not about choosing one over the other. Sometimes it is about finding a way to honor both." His voice was calm, but it carried the depth of his own struggles with balance between work and life. Sydney wrestled with the decision through long nights. She walked through the empty streets, remembering her parents' tired faces, remembering the young artist with the sketchbook, remembering every moment she had been lifted by kindness when she thought she could not stand. Finally, one morning, she gathered her courage and spoke to her family. "I have been offered a role," she said, her voice trembling, "but I cannot take it if it means leaving you when you need me most." Her mother reached for her hand, tears in her eyes. "My child, your dream is not selfish. We will rebuild, but opportunities do not always wait. If you go with love in your heart,
then you are not leaving us. You are carrying us with you.
With their blessing, Sydney accepted the role. Yet instead of forgetting her family, she used her new platform to bring attention to those who had lost homes in fires across the country. She spoke about resilience, about kindness, and about respect. Her words reached far beyond her own story, inspiring others to give and to care. Reporters who once questioned her sincerity now called her voice one of compassion and strength. She had turned her pain into purpose. Throughout it all, Keanu and Anna stood beside her. They did not seek the spotlight, but their presence gave her the grounding she needed. At one of the premieres for the film, the three of them stood together once more on the red carpet. Cameras flashed, questions flew, but the bond between them was clear. It was not about fame. It was not about power. It was about respect, humility, resilience, and kindness, the very things that had carried them through storms and fires. When the film ended that night, and the audience rose in applause, Sydney glanced at Keanu and Anna. Her eyes glistened as she whispered,
I never would have made it here without you.
Keanu shook his head gently, smiling with quiet humility. You made it here because you believed in yourself. We only reminded you of what was already inside you. Anna squeezed her hand, her smile soft and full of pride. And now you will remind others. That is how kindness continues. The applause grew louder, but in their hearts, the real victory was not the success of the film, nor the headlines that would follow. It was the knowledge that respect had guided them, kindness had healed them, and resilience had carried them through every test. Together, they had discovered a truth greater than any stage or screen could hold, that the most powerful story of all is the one written in the quiet moments of human connection.